Welcome to the National Mail Summit. It's so good to see so many of you here for a members talk, which is great. I hope many of you also had the chance to go to our members lounge, which is you would all have seen Vampire is back of all time. Obviously, in the last few years, there's been lots of discussion about him, good, bad, and everything, and about his different journeys that he has. The 3 amazing voyages of exploration. And so if you could please welcome Andrew Clifton from our speakers group who's going to tell us all about it. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Let me just see if this works. Does that sound better or not?
No.
Okay. This works, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yes.
If I get tired of bellowing, I'll come back to this.
Hello.
There you go. Turn it on. That's
Thank
the
you.
key.
I thought okay. Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you for coming out in the weather that's not ideal. Yes, indeed. James Cook, a man at his time. His time, ladies and gentlemen, was 250 years ago, roughly. So I need you to think about that during this talk. There was no mobile phone, there was no Google, there was no satellite, there was no Polar Fleecy, there was no Gore-Tex. What James Cook and his sailors did, and I was just cranking the numbers roughly, there are about 400 of them, don't quote me, but about that, who went with him on these voyages on the 5 ships for which he was responsible. They did what I'm going to talk to you about today with very little knowledge. The maps of the world had lots of blank bits, you know, there be dragons, etc. So in that context, ladies and gentlemen, we need to think about what he has done and what he achieved. So let's talk about the early years, we'll talk about the voyage, we'll talk about his death. That was a time in the world where the thoughts and ideas of natural philosophy were increasing. So the rise of the English Navy, the thought of natural philosophy or science was important. So let's get on with it. Any Scotsmen in the room or Scots ladies in the room? If so, you can claim a little bit of credit. James Cook, from the parents' side, was in fact a Scotsman. His father, also James Cook, was a refugee from the Jacobean uprising. He fled south. And legend goes that his mother said to James Cook Sr., "May God give you grace." Well, I think the deity misheard because he ended up marrying Grace, who was a Yorkshire lass, Grace Pace. And they had a number of children. While I think about that, ladies and gentlemen, a number of the things you read will tell you different things. I've read he had 7 siblings, I read he had 6 siblings. I've read at one stage he was 122 days at sea without seeing land. Another place tells you 117. I don't think we need to get stuck in the minutiae of these things because we can argue about 1 or 2 small points, but nonetheless, they were significant achievements. But according to my information, he had 6 siblings, only 3 lived to adulthood. Anyway, he married Grace, his father married Grace Pace, and James was the second son. He was born on the 27th of October, 1728 at Marton in Cleveland in Yorkshire, so I guess he was a Yorkshireman. Life was hard. James's father was a day labourer on a farm. He was a hard-working man and had a good reputation, which was great, I guess, and he lived in what they called a biggin. And a biggin was a thatched cottage with a clay floor, a one-room thing. Life was hard. He learnt about farming, he learnt about surviving, I guess. Eventually, his father, James, was made an overseer on Sir Thomas Squatto's farm at Great Ayton, about 5 miles away from Marton. Cook was then a boy of 8. Squatto was a fairly benevolent lord of the manor and saw in young Cook skills. He saw an ability to do mathematics particularly, and therefore he paid for his education. He made sure this young man was properly educated, and Cook returned the favour by studying very hard and working very well. He was good at school, but he still earned the reputation of being a stubborn loner, ruthless and determined even then. And this is an unauthorised painting of Cook at about 17. Late teens, he's over 6 feet tall, it says he's gaunt with a raw-boned look, etc., etc. But we can't substantiate that, but that's probably what he looked like. Okay, this is a plan of Whitby, or a painting of Whitby. And this is where the story of Cook takes the turn that we all know and love. At 1745, he's apprenticed to William Sanderson, a shopkeeper at Stays, which is by the sea. He gets this recommendation from Scotto because of his ability at mathematics. All through Cook's life, and we'll see this coming up repeatedly, people who work with him like him. They appreciate his skill, they appreciate his ability, and he collects patrons as he goes along. Not in any stretch of the imagination by pandering to them, but by simply his skills and his ability. So you'll see this a number of times. So he works for Sanderson in this shop. He sleeps under the counter. He doesn't have dinner with the family. He's isolated from them. It's a pretty tough and lonely environment. A lot of sailors come in. He befriends some of these sailors. There's an apocryphal story of he actually got the sack from Sanderson's because he stole a South Seas coin. Not true. Good story, but not true. But he certainly got a lot of information from the sailors and obviously fired his imagination. So he eventually tells Sanderson he wants to leave. Sanderson lets him and introduces him to John Walker. John Walker is a wealthy Quaker ship owner in Whitby, and he's brought into the family as an apprentice. He signs an indenture. Let me read you some that's rather sweet. He signs a 3-year indenture as a servant. This contract committed Cook to, and I quote, not play at dice, cards, bowls, or any unlawful games, nor haunt taverns or playhouses, commit fornication, or contract matrimony. In return, Walker will provide lodging, food, drink, laundry, and instruction and training in, I love this bit, the trade, mystery, and occupation of a mariner. The Quakers, as you know, are a very fundamentalist group, no frills. Hard work was very much the philosophy. Cook it was imbued with that philosophy, not the religion, but the philosophy. Worked very hard and did very well, and was an excellent student. He proves, as I say, an excellent student and a fast learner, everything in marine life. The coal trade around Whitby, in Whitby they provided coal up and down the North Sea. He went to the Baltic and all those sorts of places. The North Sea can be very rough. He learned a lot about sailing Whitby cats in the North Sea, and therefore his training was in a rough training ground, which was highly appropriate. It was incredibly important to the place. He impressed all the masters he served with, and he was eventually offered the opportunity to become the master of one of these ships, a merchant trader. Now that would have been a fairly lucrative and fairly useful pastime for a young man with zero background. Remember, zero background. But what did he do? He turned it down. In 1752 he qualified as a mate on these ships, and he turned it down. And he joined the Royal Navy as an able seaman. Why in God's name would a man do that? A number of the serious biographers talk about him as being very ambitious. He was a very ambitious, very driven man. And so it may well be that he thought this was an opportunity for him to rise through the ranks knowing his own ability. Not that I think he was arrogant, but I think he was confident of his ability. To rise through the ranks and therefore become a gentleman. There are stories in history of men who were pressed, who ended up admirals. Only a couple, but it was possible. So maybe he had that in the back of his mind, or maybe he was patriotic, or maybe he wanted the prize money. Certainly was potentially more exciting, I guess. But as I say, maybe it was cold calculation about the long-term goals and ambitions. He was totally without superstition, which is unusual in sailors, as we all know. But this man was not superstitious at all. He joined the Royal Navy on the 7th of June 1755 at Wapping on the Eagle under Captain Joseph Hamer. He's a 27-year-old. Now in those days, a 27-year-old able seaman was an old man. In 1 month, he was made up to master's mate. Hamer was eventually dismissed. He wasn't doing the job well enough, and he was replaced by a new captain by the name of Hugh Palliser. Now, Palliser became the third great Cook patron after Scotto and Walker. He rose very high, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Palliser and Cook got on pretty well. They were both Yorkshiremen. On the 22nd of January 1756, he was made up to boatswain, responsible for ropes, sails, cables, anchors, etc. He qualified as a ship's master in 1757, an important role. The master, a non-commissioned master, not the master of the ship, was the heart of the ship with the captain, I guess, at its head, and he was responsible for masts, yards, etc., and importantly, updating charts. So moving on, this man, and I put lucky in inverted commas because you make your luck as you go along. You know, the harder I work, the luckier I get. All of these men were admirers of Cook, helped him and supported him along the way. And you'll see there, Lord Colville, Mr. Cook's genius and capacity. He was Mr. Cook because he was still a master's mate or a master of a ship at this stage, a non-commissioned officer. Palliser became very important, controller of the dockyard, and also partly responsible for Cook's demise in a roundabout sort of way. But the two of them were lifelong friends, and he did a very good job with him. The other fellow, Samuel Holland's a surveyor. He was a captain in the Royal Americans, I think was the corps, an army man, born in the Netherlands, called Holland, appropriately enough, I suppose. So this man is particularly important. In a practical sense, these two were more patrons, I suppose. So as a chart maker and surveyor, we come down to France and Canada. William Pitt decided to drive the French out of Canada. It was too expensive for them, it was sending them broke, and he wanted that territory. So Cook is sent on the Pembroke to the east coast, and he helps make new charts of the region. He augments his skills as a chart maker when he bumps into this man Holland, who's got a table on shore. And they get talking, they become friends, and Holland teaches him the art of table surveying, so he can more tightly tie down the azimuths and things he takes to generate the charts he needs. So with that help, he eventually, after a number of summers, he comes back and forward a number of times, his skills improve as he does more and more charts, and he charts Newfoundland here. Now just look at the shape of that. Again, we've got no satellites, we've got no Google, we've got chewing gum and string, probably not even chewing gum. And the chart that he produces is excellent. In fact, I have seen a show where they laid Cook's chart over a Google representation or a satellite representation of Newfoundland, and it's really, really very good, terrifyingly good. So his skills improve. He does a lot of work in the St. Lawrence Seaway to help Wolfe in the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. I mean, he can't hardly take credit for it, but he was a contributor to that as well. So this is where he learns his skills. Oop, wrong button.